Okay, hello. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a good week off, at least from this course. I know you may not have had that much of a break from your other courses, but hopefully that was helpful to you. Okay, so this week we're getting into some stuff like we're gonna start kind of building on some of the ideas that we've been um, talking about and sort of putting together. So we're going to introduce some new stuff, but also sort of put some stuff into context. So some of this is probably going to be familiar because it's going to talk about some stuff that we've already covered, but it's sort of building on some of those things that we've covered. So we're talking about diversification and regionalization. So sort of looking at how biodiversity um, becomes sort of like regional patterns and how we can draw like or how we can create biomes and provinces and things like that based off of these larger scale patterns in biodiversity and biogeography. First of all, we've talked a lot about evolution, and I think we've seen pretty clearly that evolution occurs across sort of two dimensions. You know, one's obviously time, but there's also a spatial component to evolution as well. I mean, this is a biogeography class. So to study it, we have to study both the history of place and a history of lineage. And we've sort of, if you remember, not last week, but the past couple chapters and modules, we've been talking about something that could be considered a history of place, at least in a physical science sort of way. We've been talking about sort of the geologic past of the Earth, and then sort of some of the more recent things that happened during the period of the Pleistocene. And so we're sort of setting the stage, and that's been sort of a history of place. And now we're going to sort of talk about, and we've already talked a little bit about history of lineage, but we're going to get into some more of those ideas as well. So you sort of have to look at what's the history of the geology and the actual history of the physical environment, and then you look at what's the history of the organisms and the taxa that are found there, and you sort of combine those two, and you can get an idea of the biogeographic patterns of a location. So let's look at a few fundamental geographic patterns here. I want to introduce some new terms and some terms that I may have used, but let's give them some formal definitions now. One of those is cosmopolitan, and so we're talking about, in this case, we're talking about populations or more distributions of, it could be a population, it could be a species, it could be some other higher classification. But what we're saying here is that a distribution is cosmopolitan if it's distributed throughout the world. So it's not restricted to one area, it's widespread. And so whatever group or species you're talking about has a widespread distribution globally. In contrast to that would be something called endemic. So that's basically just the opposite. So here we would say a distribution is endemic if it's occurring only in one geographic place. So it's basically just the exact opposite of cosmopolitan. So it's occurring only in one geographic place. But endemism is a little bit tricky in that it's not restricted to scale. So endemism can occur across a broad range of geographic scales and is often decoupled from taxonomic diversity. So I think, it's easy to say if there's one species. So here, let's just look at an example. This is the Hoatzin, and it's only found in this little area of South America. And so it's pretty easy to say, okay, this species is endemic to this part of South America. And I think that makes sense to people. It gets a little bit trickier when you're starting to think about different scales. So this ovenbird is endemic to this entire portion, basically, of Central America and South America too. So that gets a little bit trickier when you're like, okay, this is all one area, and I guess this is also one area, but it's the same, much different sizes, and that's the case. And so basically, you're saying, is it restricted to a single like area that you can point to, or is it widespread throughout the globe? And this is not widespread enough to be widespread throughout the globe, so we consider it endemic to sort of Central and South America. So geographic scale is not necessarily going to determine endemism. Similarly, taxonomic diversity is not going to either. So here we have the African cichlids, which are found in the Great Lakes of Africa, and they're renowned for their diversity. Like there's tons and tons of different types of these things, all found in this one or couple of lakes here. And so it's not necessarily, so all of them are endemic. You know, you're not looking at a single species, you're looking at tons and tons of different species. Or you could have a single species, again, you know, endemic to a very much more narrow location. So endemism, again, it's not restricted to a single geographic scale or a portion of scale. It's independent of scale and taxonomic diversity. So it's a little bit tricky to wrap your mind around, but I think it makes sense looking at a few examples. And something else that's sort of related to these ideas is the concept of disjunct. So we say that it's a scenario when two or more groups of unrelated taxa are geographically separated. If you have that scenario, then we would say that's a disjunct. Basically, the population that's separated from the main population is disjunct. And this is a good example of this. And here we're looking at, so this map is basically sort of the southern hemisphere here, and we're looking at the distribution, historical and current distribution of the evergreen southern beaches, Nothofageaceae. I won't ask you to repronounce that, but these are beach species that are evergreen. They grow in wet, cool, temperate forests of South America, New Zealand, New Guinea, New Britain, Australia, and fossil remnants which are found in Antarctica. You're seeing sort of the total, the distribution here of this is like where all the fossils have been found, and in this outline here, and then in the shaded regions you're seeing the disjunct populations. And so if we look at this table down here, it's a little bit tricky, but basically this column is like going back in time. So this is would represent far back in time. This is recent times, and the shade is just like the timeline. So we can see in Antarctica, basically somewhere around the lower Miocene, that we're not finding any specimens there or fossils from that time period, but the time period that we find them in is this right here. And that corresponds to, like, you know, in New Guinea, they're not found before that, and then they're found after. So basically what this is showing is that there were dispersal and probably some vicarious events that happened where there was this, probably going back to the time of Gondwana, and most of this was connected. There was a widespread distribution of this group of beaches, and then as things separated, the populations became disjunct, and there was sort of a source population here at one point down here, but that is no longer the case. So we find the fossils, but now we have these disjunct populations. Okay, I want to sort of finish off by, you know, just looking at a few more sort of examples of endemism and cosmopolitanism. So some geographic ranges of taxa are very, very small. So we remember back to that example where I showed it's independent of geographic range scale, but a lot of organisms that are endemic do actually have pretty small geographic ranges. And so here's just a couple examples of that. We're looking at some island chains off the coast of California. You can see this fox species is basically restricted to these islands. This flowering species is restricted to basically one island. Similar with this vegetative species restricted to basically one island. So it doesn't have to be the case that they have really small restricted ranges, but a lot of times that is the case. Just keep in mind that it isn't always the case. Another interesting one, here's the native habitat of the devil's hole pupfish, which has a total surface area, the habitat has a total surface area of 20 by 3 meters, basically. So what, 60 square meters of surface area. Basically this one this one spot in right here, you can see the outline of that, is basically this one area. An entire population, when it was found in 1972, it was 550 individuals. So this whole species is found just in this one little like subterranean lake sort of thing. And it was, when it was discovered, 550 individuals. And they've been tracking it since then. And the population in 2013 got as low as 35. A couple of years ago in 2019, it was reported at 136. That's the most recent data that I could find on it. So it seems to be that it's increasing, but still remarkably, that's one of the most restricted geographic ranges you could possibly have. Sort of the opposite end of this would be an example of cosmopolitan, and there's not a whole lot of species that are really purely cosmopolitan. Here we're not even looking at a species, we're looking at the bat family, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that one. I mess it up every time. But it has a almost completely cosmopolitan distribution in the sense that it's almost found everywhere. This family is now, not every genus or species will be found in these locations, but the family is very widespread. Basically, unless you're in the Arctic latitudes, you're going to find members of this family pretty much anywhere, even these super remote areas. So that's a very clearly cosmopolitan distribution. And one other thing that's worth mentioning here is that a lot of these geographic range patterns tend to reflect the hierarchical structure of taxonomic classification. So we have, you have a family, and within a family you have multiple genera, and then within each genus you have multiple species, and so that tends to be reflected in the patterns of geographic ranges. So here we're seeing this family of small rodents in the western United States and into Central America. And basically you're seeing what you're seeing here is sort of the nested structure. And so within this geographic range of the entire family, you have a more restricted geographic range of this genus and this genus, which I think is this guy and this guy respectively here. So you have this one which has a more widespread, which is Dipodamus, I guess would be how you, yeah, that's how you say it. It's restricted, but it has a pretty widespread. It's more closely related to the family, the overall family distribution, whereas this genus is much more restricted. And so if we look at that genus specifically, there are a couple of species here, and you can see they have adjacent but non-overlapping geographic ranges within the genus. So within the geographic range of the genus, you have several geographic ranges of different species. And if we even look within this species here, which is this one, so it's this range here, so this species, there's two distinct different evolutionary lineages. Now, so there's this mitochondrial DNA lineage and this one. Both of these are members of the same species, which is this one here, and has this geographic range here. And so all of these are located within this genus, which is located within this family. So you often see that sort of nested hierarchical structure in the geographic ranges that corresponds to the taxonomic categories. Okay, so I'm going to finish this portion of the video up. There's a reading here about the ecological web of Cocos Islands, and it's an interesting little thing about a species of spider that is found on that island. So take a few minutes to read through that, and then as usual, keep working your way through the module. I will see you in the next video.